We want to bring in Politico cybersecurity reporter Eric Geller to help break it all down. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So in his opening statement, former Secretary Johnson said Vladimir Putin himself directed the cyber attack of the 2016 election. Is that the consensus view of the U.S. intelligence community at this point?
It is. That's a comment that was first made public by the government in their public statement in January. The declassified intelligence report combined FBI, CIA, NSA analysis. The FBI and the CIA had high confidence. The NSA said they had moderate confidence that this was an operation directed by President Putin, yes.
Jeh Johnson also said he has not seen evidence to suggest actual vote tallies were changed. Talk about the distinction between that and the attempt by Russia to shape the views of voters.
Sure. Well, Russia has perfected the art of engaging in what is called an influence operation, where they steal information and they release it in such a way that it is perfectly timed and perfectly placed to change people's minds. We saw that with the Podesta emails. Of course, the Pizzagate conspiracy is kind of just the most famous example of a way in which that information was weaponized. There's also the kind of more direct hacking. I think when most people think of hacking of the election, they think of Russians breaking into the actual vote tabulation systems, voter registration databases, changing information there. Now, there's no evidence that any votes were changed. The states are not necessarily the most forthcoming with some of that technical data, so it's possible that something has happened we don't know about, but based on the information that we have, there's no evidence that they were able to change any votes. They were able to access some voter registration systems, but there's no evidence linking any registration problems, voting problems, to anything that Russia did.
Eric, speaking of that, Secretary Johnson said that there is evidence that many registration databases were scanned by the Russians. Explain, what does that mean exactly?
So there are different levels of scanning. It could be a Russian actor kind of just visiting a voter registration site or just kind of probing, trying to log in. It could be getting access, looking around at the files, but not actually stealing anything, not actually changing anything. Or it could be stealing information. And the former secretary was asked, what could Russia do with some of the information that they could have stolen? There are a wide variety of uses for that. That was also raised at a concurrent Senate hearing that's going on right now. But that is limited. Certainly the information that we have suggests that in most of these, I believe he said 21 states, they didn't actually get into systems to steal anything, but it's hard to know exactly what they did in all these states because DHS keeps that information very secret because they don't want states thinking that if they go to DHS for help, DHS is just going to put all that information out there publicly. So it's very hard to know the levels of scanning that could happen, but it is everything from kind of just poking around to actually getting in and taking things.
Eric, the secretary said that hindsight is brilliant. It's 2020, that the scope of the intrusions was unprecedented. So what were the biggest lessons learned, do you think, as we're listening to this hearing?
I think it's important to note he was very disappointed with the reaction from the states when he proposed this designation of critical infrastructure, which is a way to kind of bring states and state election systems into the fold, much like power plants, much like hospitals and banking systems. These are kind of the aspects of American life that if they were to sort of fall apart, there would be mayhem. Various kinds of chaos could happen if the power grid goes down, for example. So DHS watches that very closely, and he proposed doing that for election systems. He, of course, eventually did that the following January, but states are very cautious. They see that as the camel's nose under the tent, trying to have the feds come in and take over. And he was adamant that that is not his goal and that there's no authority for that. But that's something that we're still watching. The Secretary of State Association that represents them across the country is still very nervous about that designation, and they're working with DHS to kind of iron it out. And so going forward, that will be one of the areas where you could see this tension play out.
All right, Eric Geller, thanks for your perspective as this hearing is going on live. We appreciate your time. Meanwhile, let's take you back to listen in.